وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK Radio 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning, Michigan. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good day, everyone. Once again, the generals in Sudan want to continue their control in the country. As the nation moved closer to civilian rule, the generals started what looks like a civil war to stay in power. Ever since its independence in 1956, Sudan's history has been a history of successive military coups. Civilian rule in Sudan was always short-lived. This time, each military faction, there are 2 of them, there are 3 of them, there are 4 of them. Each faction is supported by external actors. And while Sudan is a bridge to gold and rare minerals in Africa, about 95% of its population live below poverty level. To discuss these issues, we have a panel of experts and distinguished guests. We have Mr. Elfadil Elhashmi, who is a human rights activist. We have Professor Richard Chasdi of George Washington University, and we have Dr. Safi Saeed, who is a co-founder of Sudanese Canadian Health Professionals. Before we get started, I want our audience to know that we are coming to you not just on radio, but also by video. Go to the Facebook page of US Arab Radio, and you can watch us on Zoom on Facebook. My first question, I need to get the answer from all 3 guests. And we start with Professor Chasdi, and the question is, what is the main reason, probable reason behind the outbreak of fighting in Sudan?
Well, it's been reported that there was a disagreement between General Dagalo and General Buhuru over a consociational arrangement, in other words, a power sharing arrangement, which was the activating factor, if you will, for this more immediate set of conflicts. But there have always been rivalries between, and deep rivalries between General Buhuru and General Dagalo. And this is reflected in terms of their different, in the case of Al-Buhuru, who is essentially what people call the de facto head of the state of Sudan national interests, and the subnational interests of the rapid support forces, which are under the control of General Al. That was an activating factor. And there are deeper factors in terms of personal rivalry than there is, as you've mentioned, this historical condition where civilian rule has been short-lived indeed, and that the military has played a predominant role in political affairs. This also was inclusive of the 2019 removal of President Omar al-Bashir, who himself started down the road of his own demise by means of austerity programs and programs that were very harsh on women. So he ruled between 1989 and 2019. So I think you can think of short run, middle range, and long run factors here. But this power sharing agreement really was the spark that ignited this recent set of events.
Mr. Elhashmi, what is the same question? What is the main reason behind the fighting in Sudan?
Thank you, U.S. Arab Radio, for having me to highlight some of these, the reason behind this apocalyptic crisis in Sudan. We know it is an urban warfare, which is affecting more than 6 million Sudanese in the capital cities, the 3 cities. There are very serious political impacts regionally. I mean, locally in the Sudan, regionally in the area, and internationally. So my perspective will be a medium run perspective or approach to those 3 reasons and long terms. So because we have to look at the historical background of it too. So the main thing here is the interest of, local ruling circle, interest of regional actors, and interest of international states or companies, or so to speak. The question that will Sudan ever be ruled by civilians? I think the Sudanese phoenix will rise from the ashes. So I believe in that. This is just because of the heritage and the legacy of the socio-cultural and political history. In the 19th century, in Sudan, there was the Mahdist revolution. It was anti-colonial movement, and then the white flag movement in 1924. So both are anti-colonial. Then in 1964, there was a revolution, which is similar to this. If you look at it from this, it is civilian, it is peace. It was civilian and peaceful. Then in 1985, there was an uprising. In later, 2013, there was an uprising. It was also civil. It was also peaceful. Then, and the recent one, which took place in December 2018. So, I think the main thing is all those 3 actors, they recognized and funded the partnership, the power sharing and partnership approach. And I think this is the main reason, because the military, which has been ruling, and we had since independence took place, and then we had civil war, by the way, back for 5 decades in the south. We had mass killing and genocide in Darfur back in 2003. So I think The Sudanese people nature of resistance is civilian, and that's important to recall. The age of the Enlightenment, the French Revolution had three slogans, which were liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Sudanese civilian grassroots movement had it a little bit contextually different. So it is freedom, peace, and justice, which really reflect what is happening in Sudan. When they talk about peace, they know they had 5 decades of civil war. When they're talking about justice, they talk about transitional justice and social justice. Because as you already said in the introduction, it's 95% of Sudanese people are under poverty levels. So I think this is the civilians' slogans and demands, the revolutionary demands were freedom, peace, and justice, and they had three no's. So they don't want no negotiations, no partnership, and no legitimacy no partnership with the soldiers, and no legitimacy to them. So now it is the power sharing model, which was adopted and recognized by the external and regional forces, has to be questioned. Why? Civilians cannot do partnership, cannot partner with the military, because the military are kleptocratic, they are corrupt. So
Mr. Hashmi, we are going to discuss all those issues and local, regional, international actors in a minute throughout this program. But let me switch to I see that you and Professor Chasdi agree that the basic reason goes back to the power sharing arrangement. Let me see what Dr. Safi Saeed believes the main reason behind the fighting is. Dr. Saeed.
Thank you so much for US Arab Radio for having me here. I believe the short answer is yes. The main reason of the fight is power. But if we look historically to the two groups are fighting, you're gonna realize who's actually behind this war. Who's Hemeti? Hemeti, the Rapid Armed Forces leader. He's actually created by Omar al-Bashir, who's a former leader of the country. He created Hemeti in multiple videos. Now you can see on social media. He said, "This is my Hemeti. He's my defense," because Hemeti in Arabic means defense. So he said, "He's my defense." He gave him the arm, like the armies and the force and the power to kill people in Darfur. And then the war in Darfur ended. Then Hemeti came to Khartoum in 2019 when the uprising started. And Omar al-Bashir at that time was hoping that Hemeti will defend him against the people of Sudan who started the revolution at that time. Unfortunately, Hemeti took another pathway and stood with the uprising rather than defending Omar al-Bashir. So that created an enemy relationship between them, actually ended up backfiring on Omar al-Bashir. So this is the first party who's now fighting. The second party after is General Burhan, which I believe is just he is the second phase of the old regime, the Islamic regime. He's the second phase of it, because when Omar al-Bashir lost the power in 2019, what he ended up doing something called Security Committee. So this Security Committee was led by General Ibn Auf, and then the second vice president for him was Burhan. All that committee is Islamic committee, 100%. Everybody knows in Sudan for 30 years, you wouldn't get into the military high positions if you are not loyal to the Islamic regime, to the Islamic regime. Yes. So ended up the old regime ended up bringing their second phase, which is include General Ibn Auf, who lost the power in 2 days after the uprising, and then the power ended up with General Burhan. So he's second phase of the old regime, with his committee still ruling the country. They ended up partnering with the civilians in creating a civilian government with the respectful man, Dr. Abdullah Hamdok, and everything was going well. Everything was going well. Sudan was getting out of the sanctions from US. We were paying all our loans from that. The investment started to come. Then in October 2021, he started a coup, General Burhan and his partner Hemeti. They started a coup against Dr. Abdullah Hamdok to form a military government. So this is since the coup, they were partners. Every day in the media, you see them together. Everybody is high-riding the other one. Hemeti says Burhan is the general leader, and Burhan says Hemeti and Rapid Armed Forces are actually part of the military Sudan. So they're not Rapid Armed Forces, they're not strangers. They are part of this military. They are part of the Sudan military. They have their own law. And then after, when you have two thieves and they fight against each other, the victim appears. Now the victim is the Sudanese people now, because now they're fighting to get the power between them. That there are two parallel lines. They cannot meet. So now one of them has to kill the other to power the Sudan using the armed forces.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see all three of you agree that the basic problem is power sharing. And the question, of course, is that power sharing between who? It's supposed, the military is supposed ultimately to give that power to a civilian government. So a civilian government would not be sharing power with anybody. But let me go for a break. And when we come back, my question will go to Mr. Hashmi, and it's about how Sudan is rich in gold, yet 95% of the population are still poor, under poverty line. When we come back after the break.
Were you recently at the emergency room, urgent care, or at your doctor's office being told you need a hand, wrist, or elbow specialist? At the Katranji Hand Center, we offer the latest techniques in hand, wrist, and elbow care. From sports injuries to work injuries to everyday hand, wrist, and elbow problems, the specialists at Katranji Hand Center are here to get you back on track. Call us in Troy today at 248-869-4263 or visit us at katranjihandcenter.com to schedule your appointment today.
Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most. And make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493. At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing the conflict in Sudan. And my question now goes to Mr. Elhashmi. As I said before the break, Sudan is rich in gold. Sudan is rich in other rare minerals, rich in probably in uranium as well. And yet more than 90% of the Sudanese population live below poverty line. So please explain that contradiction.
Thank you again. The contradictions comes from the power sharing. Sudan is very rich in agricultural resources, in livestock, in gum arabic, in mineral resources, etc. But the power sharing model, the ruling model, is very problematic. How? So we're saying there is kleptocracy, which is corruption. The ruling circles want to take all. So it is never a win-win distribution of resources. So they want to get corrupt, they want to bribe, they want to loot all these resources to themselves. So to do that, I call this extreme exploitation. You need extreme ideology. So the Muslim Brotherhood came here. So they want to uncover, to justify that exploitation with an ideology. So to do that, you have to be very bloody. You have to be very violent, because that doesn't make sense. 95% are under poverty line, and they are resisting. They are very conscious, are resisting this unbalanced and irrational distribution of sources. So what happened? The Muslim Brothers, since the coup of 1989, they adopted Islamization. They call it civilization project. They have been Islamizing everything. It's education, culture, art. And they publicly, as I said, they called it civilization project. Now, what happened? When the revolution came, 2018, this distorted economic structure has never been touched. Now, how? Because more than 80% of resources have been taken away from public sector by those military mercenaries, actually. Both of them, as Dr. Atef said, both of them are mercenaries, are militias, in fact. So what they do, they took more than 80% of the public sector resources. That's like livestock, those they called armed factories in agriculture, in mineral resources. The gold has been, and now uranium is being smuggled outside the country. So that's not, in addition to this, more than 80%, the budget, the annual budget, which is revenue and expenditure, 70% of that budget goes to the military. And their companies are tax exempt, of course. So then that doesn't make sense. So what is left for education? What is left for health? The public sector, airlines, the agricultural project of Al-Jazeera, big agricultural projects has been taken away. So now this cannot happen. Now the revenues of this militia or military companies do not go to the central bank. They do not go to the balance of payment, the balance of trade. So the export, they don't come to the ministry, the control. They are not under the control of the Ministry of Finance. So this is exactly what is happening and this is a distorted economic structure. It has not been touched. So now these ruling circles, they have their own hospitals, they have their own universities, they have their own malls, imagine. And when there are crises in food, they have their own rationing, they have their own storages for like wheat, when there is a crisis in gas or oil. So they have their own ways and means to have those handy at their hands. This is the main reasons. When the democracy comes, it did not touch upon that. It left that untouched. In addition to other factors, of course, we may talk about later, like the Juba peace agreement.
Let's see. Thank you for giving us a clear image on the economic structure and domination of the military over resources and budget. But let me move to the health and medical situation. Dr. Saeed, is it true that 60% of hospitals in Sudan are not operational because of the fighting? Tell us a little more about the health situation.
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak about this. The health situation is in a complete disastrous crisis, to be honest. We all know that the health system in Sudan was already suffering before the war. All the health services are centralized in Khartoum. Like the rural areas, they have very, very poor health services. Like even the ABCs of the health needs, they're not there in the rural areas. So since all the government, everything centralized. And this war came without warning. So people were in hospital admitted actually when the fire started. So people who were having appointment to have to go to their kidney dialysis, they couldn't go because of the fire. Lots of people were waiting to get a cardiac catheterization. That has stopped. So I wouldn't say even 60% or 65%. Now in Khartoum, it's 90 or 85 to 90% of the hospitals are out of service. And when I say out of service, it's not about elective services. It's about emergency services. I personally know in our organizations that the doctors, they're asking, there is now, for example, 12,000 patients under that requires kidney dialysis 3 times a week. The medications that used for dialysis, they're running out of it. So as of probably next week, nobody would be able to do dialysis. So that basically means a slow death. So they die at homes. And we already know many of the civilians now, they died at homes, basically. There is no ambulance services. If you go outside in the roads, there is lots of fires and fighting. So if you don't get killed by your medical problem, you will get killed by shooting, unfortunately. So we've been asking, and from this point here, I will ask the WHO and all those organizations. They are trying to help. We reach out to the Red Cross and to the WHO and to lots of big organizations. The main problem now is that even the needs, they cannot deliver it to Khartoum because it's unsafe for their staff. The fire is still kept going, despite they say there is a military cease, let's say for 3 days. There is actually no cease of fire, actually. Even when they say it publicly, you hear it from people they're still fighting. So it's unsafe even to deliver those needs to the people of Sudan. So I think, unfortunately, the situation is going to get worse, even if the war stops, which I hope stops as soon as possible, because now we lost many hospitals and they're out of services. Not only hospitals, actually, even health professionals. Some of them, they're staying home. They cannot even go to the hospitals to help our patients down there. Some of them actually left the countries already to the neighbors with their families, trying to save whatever left for them. There is robberies happening in the hospital, like the rapid armed forces, they're using the hospitals as their caves. Actually, they go there, they know that the military won't fire against the hospital, so they stay actually in the hospital and use the people as protectors, like use bodies as protectors. This is the rapid armed forces. Now they're fighting inside the streets between people, and the military, they have air forces, but they cannot beat them just because there is lots of infrastructure there is going to be damaged. So to answer the situation in a nutshell, it's a very, very bad situation, and I unfortunately I don't see it getting better soon. But I urge everyone who's involved in the decision maker higher, like the United Nations, WHO, all the neighboring countries, they have to work to do everything we can just to stop the fire. So for now, I don't care about who wins it, to be honest. I don't care about the militaries, old regime, or whoever takes over. I care about my people there. The only way to stop people from suffering is to stop the war.
Next, I want to discuss the role played by external or international or regional factors. And I will ask Dr. Chasdi about that when we come back after the break.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics, according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600. Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
In a perfect world, everyone would be a perfect driver.
Hands at 9 and 3, everyone.
9 and 3.
Everyone would follow all the rules.
Please, go ahead and merge. I'll make room.
Thank you, fellow driver.
And nothing unexpected would ever happen. Even the squirrels would know the right time to safely cross the road. In this perfect world, you wouldn't have to wear a seatbelt. But in case you hadn't noticed, we don't live in a perfect world. About 1,000 people in Michigan die each year in vehicle crashes, and thousands more are injured. Wearing your seatbelt reduces your risk of death in a crash by 45% in a car and by 60% in a pickup truck. So until we find a perfect world to drive in, make our imperfect world safer by buckling up. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing the conflict, the fighting in Sudan. And Professor Chasdi, it's being reported that external actors, whether regional or international, are involved in supporting the two factions in Sudan. So can you tell us who is helping who and why?
Well, first of all, the Wagner Group is in Africa in the broader sense, in countries like Burkina Faso and Guinea and in Chad. And Chad remains an important epicenter for counterterrorism efforts for both France and the United States. There are rebel forces in Darfur the rebel forces that have worked themselves into the city of Genina. And these are non-affiliated militias that are, for example, have battled in the past the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed, as you know, were under the time of President Omar al-Bashir of 1989 to 2019, Arab militias. Devils on horseback is the translation of Janjaweed, who killed some 300,000 people in Darfur. And one of the international issues that we should talk about, of course, is the extradition of President Omar al-Bashir as an indicted war criminal to the International Criminal Court. So these are examples of other forces there. There are a host of different international issues to deal with. American foreign policy makers for years who have been attentive to the situation in Sudan have basically described what they consider to be a nightmare situation where ISIS and ISIS type of terrorist groups would take significant hold in Darfur. And since Darfur is huge, it would make it very difficult to practice effective and sustained counterterrorism efforts. So that's one reason and one issue why this is important. When looking at outside groups, in addition to the Wagner Group and Putin, one of the things that I think that you have to think about now within the context of broader international affairs and this pivot of Saudi Arabia and Iran towards the Chinese, are number one, Chinese authors of working as an interlocutor to solve the conflict, and Saudi Arabian efforts recently to save the nationals of several different countries as being expressive of increased Chinese influence. The Chinese in Africa have had substantial success in terms of economic policy for several decades, and are seeking to increase political influence in the Middle East, and Sudan is in the Middle East. And so we need to think about that in that sense. And so the roles of China and Russia, by means primarily of the Wagner Group, are important. Russia also has plans to establish a naval facility in Port Sudan, so that the Russian influence can be even more direct than through the Wagner Group. There's also the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, where on the one hand, Egypt and Sudan, and Egypt has played historically an important role in Sudanese affairs with regards to the operationalization of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and have been in conflict with Ethiopia over this, in essence arguing that this would tap into, quite literally, the lifeblood of Egypt, which is the Nile. So this has regional implications. The other implication, of course, is South Sudan, where the majority of oil fields are found, and that the pipeline and from South Sudan, since South Sudan itself was crafted in 2011, that is in jeopardy, and that pipeline and primary oil refinery are under the control of the Rapid Support Forces of Dagalo, and it's South Sudan that exports oil and relies almost entirely on revenue that it derives from the sale of that oil. So we have key stakeholders, including Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, and South Sudan. And on the international scene, we have to think about the Chinese and the Russians. And this is another example where the Americans have essentially found themselves on the sidelines. There was an interesting editorial piece by Josh Rogan in the Washington Post yesterday, where he pointed out that the United States did not support Sudanese civil society organizations. The United States, Rogan points out that the United States did not impose sanctions after the military coup against Abdallah Hamdok in 2021, and that in short, the Biden administration was, in Rogan's words, ill-prepared and conceded its influence to other countries. And this comes, as I said, in the wake of this pivot and reestablishment of basic diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was an arrangement brokered by President Xi Jinping. And this really, I think, ultimately stems in terms of the more immediate era from the seemingly haphazard withdrawal of United States forces from Afghanistan. I think the perception in the Middle East was one of real irritation in terms of the war in Ukraine, where it was perceived that the Americans would race to the assistance of the Ukrainians, but when threatened by Tehran, for example, many Arab states felt that the United States would be very slow to respond and certainly not respond in the same effective and sustained ways that it did in Ukraine. And that the withdrawal in Afghanistan gave the perception, if not the reality, of American weakness in American international security politics, which some have argued have translated into Vladimir Putin's increased enthusiasm for an invasion of Ukraine in February of last year, and has had ripple effects throughout the world. But what Rogan and others are arguing is that in this same sort of way, where even though Antony Blinken has promised that the United States is ready and able to play an active role in negotiating a nonviolent resolution to the problem, that in this case, American hesitancy in terms of withdrawal of 16,000 Americans stranded in Sudan because the situation was ostensibly too dangerous for removal after they had removed embassy staff from the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum, again reinforced this perception, and that American forces had been waiting in Djibouti for the situation to rectify itself, or at least become less dangerous. I think that what you're going to see is that because the RSS and the Sudanese military have essentially divvied up, according to Washington Post reports, the manufacturing sector and the oil infrastructure sector, control different parts of the country, that this may really turn out to be a middle run to long run type of conflict situation. And the frustration is that, according to the literature, that outside international parties really only have a limited role in terms of this broader transition that we were seeing in Sudan from an authoritarian to a more democratic system. And the essential problem, I think, is this, based on the outstanding literature in the field, that the core elite of the military, they have to see a role for themselves in a post-military controlled political environment. And if they don't, they themselves can squash any sort of efforts towards democratic reform. And you saw that, I think, in the case of Abdallah Hamdouk, who's an economist and was basically a non-charismatic transactional as well as transitional actor. The other problem is that if moderates and those engaging in democratic reform aren't moving fast enough, or the perception is they're not moving fast enough in terms of the pace of reforms, there are going to be advocates of reform that will shoot at moderates from the other side, saying that the pace of reform isn't fast enough. So that reformers are always walking a tightrope between the old regime on the one hand, military-based all too frequently, and those reformers on the other hand who say they aren't moving fast enough. So the question has to be, knowing that there's a limited role for international involvement in terms of pushing these two sides towards a ceasefire, and knowing that each side at this point has not come to what is called a herding stalemate, where the existing conflict is just too costly to endure, and that efforts are made on the part of one or both sides to come to sort of some resolution to this. The idea is that outside international actors have to create a role for the military in some form or fashion for the top figures in the military. And this includes Burhan, and this includes the Gallo, and includes others, that gives them some reason to commit to the transition to a civilian government.
Okay, Professor Chasdi, thank you for the explanation. And I need to invite a comment, a response from Mr. Hashmi about the involvement or non-involvement of other external actors in the crisis, but when we come back after the break.
Ziyad brand, quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market and Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing the conflict, the fighting in Sudan. And Mr. Hashmi, now we just listened to a lengthy presentation from Professor Chasdi on involvement or non-involvement of international and regional actors in the conflict, the Sudanese conflict. Do you have any comment to make?
Yes, I will be adding to what Prof. Chasdi mentioned. So I argue that the international community, I'm talking about the UN mission, the US, the European Union, the African Union, as well as the African Union. I'm also saying the neighboring countries, which she mentioned by names. So they implemented, they planned and implemented the whole thing since the transitional government. First of all, I know Joe Biden now yesterday is having those sanctions. That's too little, too late. But according to, responding to your question, so those external factors, what they did, they have been treating the rapid support forces as a peer to the armed forces when they're talking about merging in the recent negotiating deal as peer to the armed forces when talking about mergers. That's one example. The second example, we knew all, it is reportedly that the European Union supported and funded, actually gave money to the rapid support forces, the Janjaweed militia, to stop my immigration from along the borders, the Libyan, Sudanese borders, the migration of Sudanese, Eritreans, and Ethiopians. So they were funded. That empowered the rapid support forces. So I think this is a great deal of involvement, which is very damaging to the Sudanese situation, to the balance. This is like actually making them as mercenaries. So we know all they supported they participated in the Yemeni war. So the third involvement, which was very negative and damaging, was planning and implementing the Juba peace agreement. So the conflict resolution model of splitting power and wealth among the leaders, the top ranking of the armed forces, the armed movements. So they, instead of supporting the real displaced people in camps in Darfur, they were supporting their granting quotas, financial quotas, ministerial positions to the leaders of the armed forces. So that's definitely a very negative involvement.
Dr. Saeed, do you have anything to comment on before I ask you a different question?
Yeah, I don't think not much about the involvement from international, but I believe it's still the solution between people of Sudan. I understand the US role, I understand the European role, but this is not something happened just this time. This has been happening since the like independency, since 1956. We haven't formed a good country for a while. We haven't formed a stationary democratic country even before involvement of those parties. So I understand the role from other sides, but people of Sudan, those leaders have to sit down. They have to understand now they're damaging the country. They're damaging the people. They won't find people even to rule, to be honest. They won't find the country to rule after damaging the whole country. So I think the solution still has to come from the people of Sudan themselves, including the rapid armed forces, including or the militia of Janjaweed, including the army, including those armed movements.
Now, as a medical expert, my question to you is that, as you know, Sudanese refugees are flooding neighboring countries and complicating the fragile economy of those countries. My question is twofold. One is that you're concerned about the medical condition of those refugees. We know that we have additional refugees from Syria, from Iraq, and different countries flooding the region, but also the fragile economy of those countries. Most of those countries have their own economic problems. So how do we deal with that?
It's a very, very complicated situation. As you said, the world is flooded with lots of refugees, including the recent one, the Ukrainian ones. But I think two parts. First of all, we have to help those people. This is not their mistakes. They didn't do anything by fault. They were living in a safe environment, but unfortunately, the situation led them to move to a safer place. Some of them, as you said, some of them, they're sick. They have medical needs. They need medical treatments. And most of them, they went to Egypt, the closest country. But we know, as you said, Egypt are suffering economically. So I believe the big countries have to step in. So, for example, I urge here from this position, the Canadian government to step in and to host some refugees and to open a temporary residency visa for those Sudanese people, same like they did with the Ukrainian nations, to help them to faster track to a safer country. I don't believe there will be an economic burden on the country here, because most of those people actually, they're professionals. They can be implemented in the immigration system easily. There is countries that based on immigration, so same like Canada here, they have a big immigration system, so they can actually implement those people into the community. Yes, it will take time, but as Sudanese organization like Sudanese Canadian Health Professionals and other organizations were ready to help, even by sponsoring those families individually. If they created a sponsorship program, for example, for immediate family members, I believe most Sudanese people who reside in US or Canada or all European countries, they will be able to help in sponsoring those families and taking their needs until they get a job and get implemented in the system, because it seems to be this is going to be a long war. But also the refugee organizations, the United Nations, they have to support the countries, the neighboring countries, in helping those people. They have to provide them needs. And from here, I urge everybody to donate for Sudan. We have a big GoFundMe initiation for donation to Sudan to help those people. We're with them directly. We have lots of people in the border between Egypt and Sudan. They don't have a visa to go to Egypt. They lost their money. They can't even have their meals. So we're sending them money as non-profit organization, but we need support either from government or from individuals.
Professor Chasdi, we have very little time left, about 1 minute or less. So in the remaining little time we have, some analysts believe the fighting in Sudan is a first step in the competition over Africa, superpowers or big powers, maybe after the rare minerals in Africa.
I think that Sudan serves as a microcosm of greater competition in what's called I consider it, in the words of John Mearsheimer, a balanced multipolar system. In other words, that there's no longer any hegemon. The United States, after the end of the Cold War, was clearly the hegemonic power. But I think that with the emergence of China and you have a certain political tripolarity or unbalanced. A balanced multipolarity. So you are seeing, in essence, some of the systems factors at work that are driving conflict and non-state actors in Sudan. So I think you're entirely correct. And this is what makes this critically important for U.S. interests over and beyond what I talked about and my colleagues have talked about previously. And the Americans have had a history of basically looking at areas of the world if they conform to American interests. And prior to the end of the Cold War, it was prosecuting the Cold War effectively.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off here because I'm running out of time, but thank you,
Understood.
Professor Richard Chasdi. Thank you, Mr. Elfadil Elhashmi.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Safi Saeed, and I will see you again the first Friday next month. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.